This video is about city growth and organization. Today we're going to be focusing on the three models that are used most commonly by geographers to describe the growth of United States cities. And so the three that we'll be focusing on are the concentric zone model, or also known as the Burgess model, the sector model that we'll be highlighting and sometimes known as the Hoyt model, and then the multiple nuclei model, sometimes known as the Ullman or the Harrison-Ullman model. Most often, though, you're going to hear multiple nuclei model. So let's get started. We'll start with the Burgess model, or the concentric zone model. Basically, it's highlighting a very traditional concentric rings around a central business district. That, as we look at the density or the sort of the gravity that brings activity into and supports the Christoller's central place theory. You have the CBD followed by several rings around that highlight not only the change in real estate value, but also density that we're going to see. And so, generally speaking, that first ring is central business district. The second ring is in that purple zone is the zone of transition, where you might see some basic light industry or industrial zones or areas, mixed with low income or usually older, less viable housing situations, oftentimes tenement housing. The third ring becomes more single family independent working homes, where maybe you have blue collar working class families, new immigrants, singles, or people that don't have a family yet. You move beyond that, you get into more residential areas, and further yet into the fifth, the commuter zone. Basically, we're in suburbia. So just another quick, more closer look to this, and specifically looking at Chicago. When Burgess developed this model in the 1920s, he focused on that orange area, the CBD, and where there really isn't residential areas, but it's a hub of economic activity. And in the ring around it, you're going to see if there's housing, it's generally poor quality, because it's in areas where you're going to see more still economic activity, generally manufacturing or industry, and it's known as that zone of transition. And once you go beyond that, you start hitting the more residential neighborhoods, generally speaking the working class in the third ring. In the fourth ring, you're seeing, as the urban sprawl continues, you're going to see more spacious lots, bigger homes, generally speaking higher income in terms of social status. And so one of the things that defines all these models is really the social class, generally speaking from lower, middle, and upper class, and in different ways, but highlighting these different economic realities in the models. You get to the outside, and within some pockets, you're going to see the high income or the upper class housing areas. So just a quick image. This is just an image of that zone 2, or that transition, where you can see a little bit run down. You can see that some of this you have a couple family homes, probably multiple family homes, tenement housing. You can see some boarded windows and such. The next model is the sector model, and that is going to be something that was developed, that really, when Homer Hoyt looked at the Burgess model and he started applying it to Chicago, he noticed that there was some contradictions. That if we looked at the south side of Chicago, those high value, higher income families were not there. It was very poor, low income housing. And he developed this idea of a sector model, which basically said that the model gets shaped based on transportation access, and the types of economic activity that take place in some of the surrounding areas. And so if you look at the central business district, it's highlighted by the transportation industry, that access to maybe rail lines or freeway systems are going to take precedent and define some of those areas. Not only does residential area will steer clear, but those light industry manufacturing are going to try to gain access to it. If we look at the residential areas tend to surround it, and again, sometimes along transportation routes. And then the higher class residential maybe are going to usually have their own sort of wedge and be surrounded by middle class neighborhoods. Maybe highlighting to, well, in the Twin Cities area, you could look at the west and in the lakes. Going out, from Lake Calhoun on, the western suburbs define that very well for us. So again, looking at the model more specifically, 1939 Homer Hoyt. Instead of having rings, they're more sectors or these wedge-shaped zones that kind of are defined by accessibility to, in particular, industrial areas and transportation lines. Our last model that we'll be looking at in this particular video is our multiple nuclei model, and that is really highlighting the fact that in both cases, previously you had some basis tied to the central business district, that you had, at some point gaining access to that was a defining factor. In the multiple nuclei model, this is a very common one in the United States, as we have a little bit different development pattern that happens in urban areas. And this is where this might be due to a university, where you might see different patterns of restaurants or fast food chains. It could be near an airport, where industrial areas might develop because they want access to that transportation node, yet it's not necessarily near a central business district because of noise, air traffic, etc. And that's also going to define then the residential areas or surrounding it. And so basically what you have are these small pocket areas that surround various elements that we've highlighted before, but not in a concentric way or even in a sector way. But it's more complex, it's more varied, and it can vary from city to city what might define those areas. In the Twin Cities, we have edge cities, where you have, based on the band or the belt lines of the major freeway networks, and where those intersections take place, we see buildup. We see a density of commercial areas. They call it the multiplier effect, where highlighting the buildup of the different services, restaurants, along those areas where we have those prime intersections. So, again, briefly just going back to our first slide, three models that you should be aware of for the U.S. development of U.S. cities are this concentric zone model, or the Burgess model, the sector model, or the Hoyt model, and then the multiple nuclei model.